Hi, everybody. So this presentation is going to help you with evaluating scholarly sources. So for different assignments in class, you'll be asked to use scholarly sources or to use sources in general to help support your claims, to help support your essays, and so on. So we're going to go over how to tell if a source is scholarly. So first of all, what am I talking about when I say that I'm going to be using scholarly sources? Sources are considered scholarly when they are peer-reviewed. So that means that other scholars who are experts in the subject have read the information and approved it, right? So, oops. So other scholars have said, yes, it looks like this information is accurate based on our most current, research and knowledge. Scholarly sources are also published in reputable places. So, journals and reputable book publishers require sources to be peer reviewed before they'll go ahead and publish them. Sometimes .gov websites or national newspapers work depending on the assignment. So, if you're ever in doubt, go ahead and look at the assignment. And generally, I will say if it needs to be specifically journal articles or if some .gov websites or national newspapers work. If you're ever in doubt, you can just ask me, send me a text on Remind or an email, and I'm happy to clear up if a particular source will work or not. You can also ask a librarian, another teacher, or a tutor, and generally those people will be able to help you out as well. Okay, so we've got some examples here. These are sources that I use in my classes. This may or may not be one that you have actually read for class, but this is one of the first pages in a source that I use that talks about different health issues that college students face. So one of the things that we can check for if we're not sure if a source is scholarly is we can look at the author's credentials. So you can see here that this particular source has 3 authors and that all of them have credentials of being associated with particular schools, and they deal with nursing and public health. So it looks like their credentials probably give them the authority to speak on these particular subjects. But I could also just, do a quick Google search of these people and see, are they reputable? Have they been doing this for a while? Do they have other published pieces and so on? So any source that's going to be scholarly will definitely have the author or authors listed, and their credentials are usually listed as well. We also can see publication information. In journal articles, this can appear in a couple of different places, but usually it's either at the top or bottom of each page. And you can see the page number for one thing, but you can also see the journal title. Sometimes you'll even have an issue or, a particular edition that this article was in. So look for that information too, because that lets us know that this is published in a journal. Also, if you're looking at websites, you can look at where things are published because the information after the dot will help you to see that. So for instance, a .gov website means that this is an official government website, and usually these are okay places to look for things like, maybe you need statistics on how many people were incarcerated in a certain year, or how many people were incarcerated and then reincarcerated. Let's say you're talking about recidivism, for instance. Then the Department of Justice would be a good place to go for that because they do have the official, stats on that information. So .gov websites are usually something that you can use for a class. We also have some cases in which newspapers are fine to use, so you can find those online, you can find them in print, but this is an example of the New York Times, a New York Times article about coronavirus. You'll see that it tells us where it's published, right? This is from the New York Times. We also have authors who are listed, so that is important. If you're ever not sure if a newspaper article is acceptable for a particular assignment, just ask me about it. But generally, national newspapers are fine for lots of your, discussions and things like that. So if I wanted to look at whether or not a newspaper article was reputable, I would start by looking at the authors, right? So I would find out information about what this particular person does, and then I would look at, does their background match with what they're talking about? So for instance, you would not expect someone who has a background in, I don't know, child development, for instance, to be talking about maybe something like how the coronavirus mutates and spreads, right? Because it's just not their particular field of expertise. So you'd want to look at who this person is, what they have degrees in, and what they're writing about, and then kind of make a decision from there about, do you think they have the authority to write on this particular subject? So when you're reviewing sources, quick things to look for. We need to make sure that we have a named author with credentials. We need to look at publication information. So volume and issue number will tell you that something is in a journal, or it might have the journal title or the name of the publisher. If you're using databases, make sure that you check the peer-reviewed box, and that will help you. Remember that sources are not scholarly and should not be used if there's no named author or the author has no credentials. If the source is a website open to public revision, so for instance, Wikipedia, blogs, or if the source isn't peer-reviewed, so maybe a magazine article, a blog, a random website. So here are some examples of what to look for when things kind of go wrong, and some red flags that might help you see that this is not the best source to use for different things in our class. So this is one example that I get a lot from students, because Pro-Con is one of the places that you can look for information when you're starting to choose, a topic for your research paper, for example. And while this is a perfectly good place to start because it gives us lots of interesting information and shows us many sides to an issue, these are not ending places because, for instance, this does not have an author, right? So you would need to do a little bit of further research to get some more information about this topic before you could find an article or a book or something that would help you be able to write about this. This is an example of someone that doesn't have credentials. So for instance, we have just sort of maybe a staff writer. I'm not sure who exactly this is that's writing this, but they don't have their credentials listed, so that's a red flag. Another thing to look for is what kind of an article this is, right? So this one states down here that it is an opinion piece, which means that this person who's writing it is just sharing his opinion with us, which again is totally fine for casual reading and that kind of thing, but not so much the type of source that you would actually bring into an assignment or an essay. We've also got some websites that can be problematic as landing points for the types of sources that you would like to use in your particular, essays or assignments. Wikipedia is one of those websites. So remember that Wikipedia is open to public revision, meaning that anybody can, go in and write an article about something, which creates problems for, knowing their credentials and that kind of thing. However, Wikipedia isn't useless. It's certainly an excellent place to go for general information about, different things. And also, you can go down to the reference page on a Wikipedia article and get lots of good information there. So it's perfectly fine to start with Wikipedia. You just don't want to end with a random Wikipedia page. There are also lots of problematic magazines and newspapers out there. Remember that everybody is biased, right? but there are certain magazines and newspapers and things like that that are very biased or are even, so biased that they are openly, comical, right? For instance, there are satirical newspapers like The Onion, and these are kind of joke pieces that are written. But sometimes, and I've had it happen, students use these as regular sources because they didn't notice that this was a satirical piece, right? This person's actually joking and they're making points, but they're using satire to do it. So just make sure that you check out the magazine or newspaper article that you're thinking about using before it makes its way into your essay. Also, random websites, for instance, yahoo.com answers. Anyone can write a question, anyone can answer. This is maybe, interesting reading just for curiosity or for fun, but definitely not something that you would use as evidence in your paper because it's not scholarly or peer reviewed at all. So how can we use these problematic sources? Track down references that are used in the articles. See if those references are reputable, and if so, then you can use those references rather than the original article. So this is a great way to make Wikipedia work for you, for instance. So for some writing assignments, it's important that your sources are scholarly. Make sure that you are checking those sources out. Make sure the sources you're using or planning to use are indeed scholarly. If you have questions about any of that, you can always ask me, ask a tutor, ask your group, and so on. So quick recap. Use databases to find scholarly sources. Make sure they're reputable. For a step-by-step guide on how to find them, look in the research paper packet and or look at the PowerPoint, which goes over step-by-step directions. If you're not sure how to do that, you can always ask me or a tutor, or librarians on your campus will be able to help you with that as well.